welcome Eric Rhodes.
Come on out, guys. So I've been listening to what everybody's been saying in the sessions today, and I wanted to make some observations because it's all very confusing. We're in an industry, first off, how many people in the room are radio professionals? All right. All right, if you're not, leave the room. We're in an industry that's under attack. Everybody wants our audiences, everybody wants our listeners. For some reason, they think what we do is glamorous. They think that the money is just flowing in. They don't realize the struggle that we have to go through to bring that money in. And yet, we're under attack. Everybody wants those people. And we have to be aware and not overly confident. Now, there's a lot of statistics that bear out the fact that radio remains strong. In America, we're getting a lot of publicity about Pandora and what Pandora is doing to the radio industry. And if you look at the statistics comparatively, it's really a very small item. But the press loves it because the press likes the whole digital world and they like what's happening out there. But because all of these people are coming after us, we do need to be aware. So I think what I'd like to do is just make a couple of points here. We need to make sure that we fight to keep what we've got. Because we can get lazy, we can get confident. We've seen other industries that have been consumed by the digital world by now, and we haven't. And so the assumption from the outside is it's going to happen to us. Our assumption on the inside is it'll never happen to us. So the question is, what will happen? Nobody really knows, but we need to really fight to keep our audiences, fight to keep those relationships alive, and never get cocky. I just wanted to make a couple of points before we start this panel about what I think we should be doing as an industry. Number one is be curious. Explore everything. How many remember when you first got into the radio industry and you were enthusiastic and you were exploring and you were learning? And how many of us have become so consumed with our jobs and the need to meet budgets and the need to keep our bosses happy? We have now lost that curiosity, and you need to get the curiosity back. Secondly, don't assume that our incumbent status will last. You're going to have to work harder to keep your audiences, keep them engaged, and you're going to have to do it differently. Third, I think we need to all be willing to cannibalize ourselves. Look at what iHeartRadio is trying to do with Clear Channel. They're starting a whole new platform. Last week in America, we had the iHeart Music Awards on national television on NBC. That showed the clout of radio, showed the clout of that particular company, Clear Channel, but it really shows that radio still has, a position in the world of music and really reinforces it. But that also cannibalizes that company a little bit. So they're really working in two different paths, and you might want to think about working in a couple of different paths. Next is don't be a playlist. The music services out there are taking advantage of the fact that for the last 20 years, we've been saying more music and less talk. And we've just been playing the music and sometimes segueing music and putting sounders or jingles or IDs in between. And as a result, we've trained our listeners that they're listening just for the music. The reality is they're listening for our personalities, our localism, and we need to enhance the things that we do really well. So the things that playlist services do really well is play the list of music. That's about all they can do. So you need to be local. You need to curate. Curation is the magic in radio. You need to talk about the music. You need to sell the music. You need to get people excited. You need to entertain, and you need to relate to your audiences. Next, be everywhere. It's tough. In my little publishing business, I only have about 40, 45 people in my little business, And everything changed about 3 years ago, because now we have to be on YouTube, we have to be on Facebook, we have to be on Twitter, we have to be on Instagram, and everything else that gets invented, we have to figure out ways to get there. Now, we're using a lot of very interesting tools that hit all of them all at once for us, but you need to be everywhere, because this is no longer a world of a silo of radio. This is a world where there's no more silos, that all media have become all media. You're now in the video business, you're now in the text business, you're now in the information business, you're doing things more than what you do with radio. Next is, can't read my own writing. Seduce young listeners. We have focused so much, I can't speak for Canada, but in America we focus so much on the money demographics that we haven't been putting a lot of time and attention into seducing young listeners. And we have got to bring them in. Those of us who are baby boomers, radio is the soundtrack of our lives. That's not necessarily true of young listeners. And part of the reason that some of them may not be coming in is because we're not customizing programming for young listeners. Next is hire digital natives in your organization. I have surrounded myself by a bunch of 25-year-olds because they can relate to things that I can't relate to. They're encouraging me, pushing me to do things that I don't understand. And if you are older in your organization, get some young people in there who grew up with MP3s. None of this stuff is threatening to them, and they will be able to bring you into new places. Program to the connected cars is the next thing. We do a conference called Dash with Jacobs. It's about the connected car. And we realized when we interviewed listeners on video, we realized that a lot of those listeners, once they got these connected cars and had Pandoras in their car, started abandoning radio. And when we probed it, one of the first things we discovered is they could not easily find their radio stations, because they would tell the radio to find the radio station, and the names they were using didn't work on the car radio system. So they'd say, find Power 106, and it would say, I don't understand your command. And finally, the listener would say, find 106 FM, and then it would say, I don't understand. Then they'd say, well, find 106.7 FM. So you need to start crafting some of your programming, because connected cars are a reality for probably a small percentage of our listeners, and that's changing. As we know, by 2016, every car will be connected, every new car. Embrace change, seek change, look at new things. Try new things, because evolution is always about change. And media today has become extremely sophisticated. If you study big data and what's happening, we're going to be able to drive down the road, and they're going to know we just got out of lunch, or just got out of our office heading to lunch, and the car radio is going to be able to speak to us and say, take a left, there's a special, you were at Whole Foods last week, we've got a special this week. So you want to make sure you understand that. Understand your advertisers' spending. We all have monitor reports, Hungerford's and Miller Kaplan's in the United States, that tell us where our competitors, who's getting the money in radio. But what we don't understand is that small businesses in our communities are spending a lot of money with Google, a lot of money with Groupon and other digital things. So you need to sit down with your advertisers and actually ask them, what are they spending money on beyond the logical media that you're spending time with? Next, learn how top business categories are changing. Many of us in this industry grew up selling remotes and hot dogs to car dealers. Car dealers today don't want test drives in most markets. They've completely changed their models. Most car dealers now have digital marketing managers. They basically want to control the dialogue when people are doing their research before they come in. So you need to sit down with all of your top business categories and ask them, what are you doing differently? You need to understand it, because if you're operating on what was 5 years ago, it's no longer relevant. I suggest creating an innovation team. Find some people in your organization who are really passionate about technology and ask them to invent some ideas for your radio stations. Don't assume your website is your digital strategy. We have a conference called Forecast, and we bring all these national advertisers in, and they're talking about all the things that advertisers want. And they say they laugh when radio stations come in and say, well, you can run banner ads on our websites. That's not a digital strategy. They want true digital strategy. That's something you need to understand. I mentioned driving the connected cars. I mentioned the connected cars. Make sure you go out and drive one. Fred touched on that earlier today. Value, personality, and localism. One of the big radio companies has been terminating a lot of heritage personalities, people who have been on the air for 20, 30, 40 years in a market because they were making too much money. And now we're starting to see some evidence that some of these people are actually going out, starting online presence in their markets and making a living. We've seen a couple of network talent in America who are actually making more money now than they did when they were being paid by the networks. Tom Likas and Adam Carolla, who's speaking at our Convergence conference, both are making a lot of money. And so value that personality in their brands, because those brands are what's going to bring you strength in your organization. Also, act globally. In other words, don't digitally fence out people in other places. Now you're saying, well, I don't want to pay to stream to places outside of my market. The problem is guys like me go to the gym here in the morning and listen to my local radio station, and if I'm fenced out, then I'm suddenly getting disenfranchised with your radio station. And last, devote time to learning. And I applaud those of you who are here because learning is essential. This is a time when we are evolving in the media world, and we have got to change. We cannot just stay focused on what we do. We have to evolve. So that's what we're going to touch on today with these gentlemen. What I'd like each of you to do first is to introduce yourselves, tell us a brief bit about your company and how many radio stations you have. We'll start here.
Jeff Smolian, MS Communications, radio stations in the United States, in New York, Los Angeles, Austin, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Terre Haute, and then we have magazines, and we have obviously an interactive division, a digital division, and investments and some other things.
Okay, great.
Rick Harnish, Jim Pattison Broadcast Group, privately owned company in Canada and broadcasting. 34 radio stations, 3 TV stations. We are domiciled in the provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, and proudly now in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Paul Ski, CEO of Rogers Radio and Regional Broadcast Operations. We have 53 radio stations across the country, 1,021 spectacular and very curious employees. And if I could, if I could just correct one thing, I think seducing young listeners is an HR violation.
I didn't mention request line.
Congratulations to Mr. Ski on this Hall of Fame induction. He requested his own chair and he got it. Chris Gordon, Bell Media, 83 English language radio stations, 30 conventional television stations from coast to coast.
Chris Pandoff, Chorus Radio and Chorus Entertainment. We have 39 radio stations across the country in English Canada. We also own a number of specialty television networks and a film animation company that produces content that's exported all over the world.
Terrific. All right, well, we're going to talk about a number of things, but one of the things I don't particularly like about panels is where I ask a question and then we go from person to person. If you don't have anything to say, we'll move on to the next question, but I want just jump in and speak out if there's a particular subject that's of interest to you. One thing I'm curious about is that everybody thinks that you guys have cushy jobs. How many hours a week do you typically work?
Depends on your definition of work, but you know, I mean, I think these are 70, 80-hour-week jobs. They just are.
I would agree. It's a great industry. Been in it 45 years. The hair shows it. But I come to work every day pumped and ready to go because every day's the same, but every day is different. And I would say 60 to 70 hours a week as well.
Yeah, I think that varies depending on whether my boss is in town or not. But I think But I think, like Rick, I think it's in that range. But it's really fairly fluid. I mean, sometimes we just have a lot of files that are in play, and other weeks we don't. But I don't think it's gotten any easier. I think we're spending much more time than we used to on the business. We have to. It's just part of the way things are these days.
Yeah, I think it's a 24-hour-a-day business that we're all in. I mean, you wake up thinking about it, you go to bed thinking about it. You may not be in the office for 9 or 10 hours, but it's always top of mind.
What I would add to that is with streaming and online capability now, you're kind of always working. I was listening to Jeff's stations. I've listened to every one of the panel member stations. So you're kind of working all the time, even when you're on your own time.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is what keeps you up at night? The industry is changing. We're having to deal with advertisers who have digital demands. We're having, there's, at least in the US, there's a lot of negative publicity towards radio because of the digital offerings out there. What are the things that you're thinking about that you're really concerned about that you can say?
For Chorus, we operate a number of news talk stations on the AM band across the country. So if you think about the content that's provided, it tends to appeal to older listeners. So one of the things we think about a lot is how do we get that format to the FM band, both from a regulatory perspective as well as just from being able to do it in executing, a change over to the FM band. The other thing is about the change in formats. What you try to do on the music side is to try to be ahead of the curve. And I don't think anybody could have predicted the value and the explosion of pop music today, even as short as 5 years ago. So that's a real important part of the process.
One of the things that keeps me up at night, and I'm sure all my panel colleagues would agree with this, is how are we going to repatriate the younger audience, the younger listeners who have gone to the digital platforms and smartphones and iPods and you name it. And in our company, we had the privilege about 5.5 years ago in Vancouver to receive a new FM license where we converted our AM station to FM and we launched the Peak in Vancouver, one of Canada's first AAA stations. And it's a very niche format, but we really felt that was one area that we could concentrate on in the Pattison Broadcast Group to try and repatriate younger listeners by launching a format of that caliber. And it is growing, it's taking time, it's not the populous format that we all try to zero in on the 25 to 54-year-olds. But in Calgary, just a week ago Friday, we launched our second Peak AAA station there, 95.3 in Calgary, to great response from the community. They're really looking forward to having this station in Calgary, and we're hoping to grow a much younger audience because we really feel in markets like Vancouver and Calgary, looking at it from a local perspective in particular, that there is a market there for the advertisers to zero in on.
Okay.
I think for me it's all about being relevant, maybe in 3 ways. How do we remain relevant to our audiences? And you touched on a few of these, I think, earlier, Eric. We do that by our local proposition. I mean, no other media, I think, has the unique relationship that local radio has with the local communities, and I think if we can keep that going, we'll stay relevant. Secondly, how do we stay relevant to our advertisers? And I think we do a little more of that by making sure that we have a full toolbox of things that our salespeople can sell, and at the same time making sure that our clients are educated about our particular business, and because smart, educated clients tend to buy more. And third, how do we make sure that the regulator allows us to be relevant by not shackling us in any way?
Yeah, I think the regulator piece is a big one, and Chris and I were just discussing this, the licensing of new radio stations in Canada. I think that there's enough consumer choice in this country that, we don't need new commercial FM radio stations. There's enough choice, there's enough radio, there's enough digital, there's enough audio, there's enough music. For us, the migration to digital as radio properties is probably one of the top drivers of keeping us up at night. As Paul mentioned, the client relationship, advertisers staying close to them and understanding their needs. And the brand and the listeners. The brand is obviously the key. And when I look at our brands now, I always ask myself, would this brand be able to go forward and exist without a license and a transmitter? And I think we all have to look at that and make sure that we're delivering on the promise in order for us to be able to do that.
Do you guys have moments in time when there are things that we're doing in the States that you wish you could do like Consolidation, or do you roll your eyes at what we've done in some of our markets where we'll own eight radio stations and you know, Cumulus owning 490 radio stations? Is that something you desire as CEOs, or is it something that you look upon as folly?
The perspective I think that I would have, and I think Corus would share this, is that in Canada, the difference is that companies like Rogers and Bell, Pattison, have purchased radio stations in a large measure because of the strategic value of the medium and what represents to their business. In the United States, and Jeff could certainly comment on this a little bit further, it seems that a lot of licenses got traded and that Wall Street and private equity became sort of the driver of the economics of that industry. And I think that was a danger that we didn't have in Canada for the very reason that large companies bought it for the strategic value.
Yeah, I think there are probably more things that we wouldn't do than probably would do quite.
So what are the things that you've seen us do that you wouldn't do?
Chris?
Well, I'm glad we're not so leveraged at Wall Street, I'll tell you that much. But, you know, I think that we've been able to, you know, through the fact that it's less competitive, you know, from the number of radio stations in each market, we've been able to focus on our local listeners and our local clients. And I think that's been something that has definitely been advantageous for Canadian radio, in that we've been able to sound like we exist and serve a market better than some of the markets in the U.S.
And we've been lucky because most of our companies have been family-owned over the years, quite frankly, and that makes really a big difference. It's not quite the case now, but almost the case. And I think that allows you maybe to look a little more long-term and have different priorities than you might have if that's not the case.
I think in the U.S. too, the large companies there had their centralized voice tracking studios, and a lot of the programming still is to this day centralized. All of us do voice tracking in Canada, but I know in our group we're very committed to trying not to do that. We totally believe in the local marketplace and how important it is. We really push down from the top down, bottom up, the strategy that you know, I don't know Calgary as well as I know my own hometown that I live in. And I think it's very important that we allow our management teams and our teams in those markets to do what they have to do to produce great radio and great television as well, because they know what needs to be done in those marketplaces. So we try not to do any centralized activities related to things like voice tracking, because I really do think it's hurt the industry.
Jeff, you have a different perspective?
Not really interesting enough, although I did love the idea that the comment was that you're going to have more family-owned broadcasting up here in Canada. I think we've had family-owned broadcasting in the United States. Sometimes we think it's the Manson family, but that's... But, you know, listen, I've lived through every era of this, and there were certain things that Wall Street brought capital to people, but it also set up parameters that, frankly, in bad times made things markedly worse. You know, it has given people the opportunity to grow, but I can also tell you in the consolidation era that there were things that were sold to Wall Street which had no bearing in reality, and it made it a lot tougher on the whole industry.
I'd like to talk about digital strategies. Each of you has to face this. I'd like to understand what each of your digital strategies are. And I want to start with Jeff, because Jeff's doing something interesting in the U.S. with Next Radio. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I can. And we had a good chance to talk to Chris's group last night, and I've talked to a number of you in the halls. And Gary Shapiro's out here, who talked about it today. Gary, somebody said Gary changed his mind and he now wants a mandate, which is absolutely not true. I'd like to announce up here that Gary actually wants the United States Constitution amended to guarantee that FM shifts, but that's not true either. The reality is what Gary has said is he loves the idea that we're competing in the marketplace. And as I've said, technology is moving in our favor. And what we did with Next Radio was recognize several simple points. One, that nothing is like our terrestrial signal, that we have the ability to be connected to our people with no middlemen in between, with no barriers, and that is a market difference. I'll give you one quick example, because I think the economics, for people who don't understand the difference between streaming, and our company's been streaming for 18 years. We haven't made any money yet, and I don't know anybody who's made any money. I know Pandora has a gigantic market cap, and they sell a lot of spots. but they haven't made any money. Here's why, and your music licensing fees are a little different, but let me just give you a quick example. We have a radio station in Los Angeles, Power 106. For $39,000 a year, we can send our signal to everyone in Southern California. We can reach one person or 15 million for the cost of the electricity to generate to power our transmitter. If we took our transmitter down and streamed through the data network, the cost to reach our audience, our cost in bandwidth would be about $1 million a year to replicate what we do over the air. And our listeners' cost would be more than $1 million a year because we buy in bandwidth. Now that's before we get to music licensing fees. So $39,000 versus over $2 million. Same listeners, same content. The fact is, it's why a friend of mine says every time I take a listener from over the air to streaming, I take a 40% margin customer and make him a -5. Folks, this is not a good business model. Doesn't mean we don't have to be there. Doesn't mean we keep waiting like everybody else for somebody to find the holy grail and make streaming economically viable. But what we found is that as customers start understanding they have to pay those data charges, that we can unlock what is in every smartphone in the world, and that is a radio. Look in your pocket today, your smartphone has a radio. Now in the United States, we used to sell 40 million portable radios every year. Today we sell none, because the only device anybody carries is a cell phone. So our point is, if we can put the cell phone, turn on the chip and put the radio in every smartphone, it dramatically changes our business. We're not only doing that, we've been incredibly gratified by Next Radio. We now have had car makers who want to adopt the Next Radio interactive system and put that in automobiles. We're also having tablet makers. Our point is that, number one, we need to turn on those chips, and they're everywhere. And number two, we need to build an interactive ecosystem that makes radio compelling again. I'm trying to cover a lot of ground in 2 minutes, but...
Do you have your video? Did they get that?
Yeah, can we show the video?
Yeah.
This will show you, the point was, it wasn't just to get the chips turned on, it was to build an interactive system which really capitalizes on what we do, which is relate one-to-one in local markets. So,
everybody get up.
Dick takes over Madison Square Garden on November 30th. Make sure you mark the date now. High 97 presents the official VIP pre-party. Stop by participating areas, Sprint stores, and register for VIP passes plus tickets to the show. From High 97, where hip-hop lives.
Has your chance to see Imagine Dragons live at the Frank Irwin Center. Want to go? Text the word Dragons to 29217 now. 101st texter wins a pair of tickets to the show on November 30th. Win VIP access. Visit 101x.com for more details on the show and for more chances to win from Austin's independent, local alternative, 101X.
One more quick point. I think Warren Kurtzman's here somewhere from, oh, there, right there. Okay, I can't see where. Warren's here. Coleman did research with the NAB, and we all, a few things we found. Number one, the biggest problem we have in radio anywhere in the world is the perception we're not cool anymore. People looked at this interface and said, that's cool. They love the interactivity, and it's up to us to make that interactivity work for our listeners. The second thing they found, of course, is that it only drains batteries at 1/3 the rate of listening to the exact same content through the data networks when you stream. The third thing is obviously, and this is the big issue in the United States, I assume it's going to be big here, every time somebody gets data metered and they understand they don't have unlimited data, which everybody thought they did, and now they realize that they don't, and they start paying data charges. I just got one this morning. You're over your data limit because I'm roaming in Canada. Every time people get that, it changes their conduct. So if we can have free radio, that's going to be great. But the most important thing, and this blew us away, that Warren's research found, is that people love the idea that radio could be portable. Now, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw that, because we've got a generation of people who think, gosh, you mean I could just have a radio right here in my phone? I never knew they had such things. So for those of us who grew up with not only Walkman, but, radios, transistor radios, I grew up in the late 1800s, and it's hard to believe you've got a generation of people who don't understand radio's portability. So we have the ability, we've got a great opportunity. When people see it, they love it. Our job is to convince every phone carrier in the world that they need to turn this chip on.
Okay, so great, thank you. So let's talk about digital strategies. Tell us what you're doing at your radio companies that will engage the advertisers from a digital perspective.
I'm happy to go first. For us, it's a simple process. Notwithstanding what Jeff had said about technology, we want to try to be in the space with a stream signal and some level of interactivity, both in mobile as well as in desktop, at least so that on the local basis content that we provide, if in fact the technology does replace conventional analog delivery, that we'll at least have experimented and understand the space. And I think like artists today who produce for multimedia, that's kind of the way we look at it, is we need to be in the space, whatever space becomes the dominant force.
Yeah, I think for clients, it's a little different for us as a fully integrated company. We're looking at it from a more holistic view for national clients, in that we offer them radio and television and digital and all those pieces bundled together. And by the way, Jeff, we're thrilled when you blow through your cap limit on your data usage. It's fantastic for us. So, we encourage everyone in the room to do that. But I think, from a radio point of view, we look at digital audio and digital music and digital radio as different things. And I think our strategy is going to be to employ both of those and go down a path that engages both of them as they sort of come together when the car piece comes together with the Wi-Fi in cars. But I do believe that radio needs to stand on its own, and your comments earlier about cannibalizing ourselves, I think that's really important, because that's going to find out where the soft spots are and where the really good, hard competition is. And the fact that somebody thinks they can get into the digital music game every week used to bother me. It's not bothering me as much anymore, because a lot of them are not having the success that they want to out of the gate. And a lot of them are realizing, like, hey, this is kind of like radio. There's now 20 competitors. It's actually kind of hard. So to sell an ad-supported, non-authenticated channel, that's a lot harder. And all these folks up here have been doing it for a long time. And I look forward to sort of this next evolution as we get on this path.
I think, first of all, I'd like to commend Jeff on the work that he's done, certainly in the States. You've been kind of a prophet for this for a while now, and I'm sure you're pleased with the results, so that's great to see. Well, I think we've all seen sort of random acts of digital over the last few years that really haven't gotten us anywhere. A lot of the things, or some of the things that we're doing now are a little proprietary, so I can't touch on them too much, but... Oh,
come on, just tell us, just 3 or 4 of them.
But I will leave some notes on a table outside the...
Okay.
I think, though, it's all about, the way we see it, it's all about being on the menu. And we've got to know what that menu is, whether you touched on it earlier, whether it's in-dash, whether it's, as Jeff said, I mean, radio needs to be ubiquitous again, and it can only be that way with something that somebody carries with them all the time. And today, that's a cell phone, it's a smartphone. That's really where you connect with the person in terms of a radio. So I think the future of it will be there, maybe more so than even a tablet or a computer, or even in-dash to some degree.
I think I heard a couple of weeks ago that BlackBerry, that great Canadian company, was in fact going to go the route that Jeff was talking about, embedding the FM chip into their new phones that they're making, which is a big step forward for the industry as a whole. In our company, we're much smaller than my compatriots on the stage with me, because we are centered in Western Canada, and we haven't had a real big bulk for many numbers of years to really apply a digital strategy to revenue. We stream, we Facebook, we tweet and all that, and all of our on-air staff, our teams do a great job on that. But now that we've moved into Calgary, now we're in Winnipeg. In fact, in Winnipeg, We've just introduced about a month ago a digital strategy for growing our revenues, and we feel right now with revenues and radio being flat, or flat's the new up, whatever terminology you want to use, that we have to really apply a better digital strategy in the Pattison Broadcast Group, working with our sales teams and our revenue producing clients in each and every community, from the largest to the smallest, to drive that digital revenue and geo-tracking and all that goes with it. And we're really learning that right now, and we have a test market in Winnipeg. We're also moving it into Vancouver shortly, and we hope to see that grow throughout our company in Western Canada, because we think that's a big uptick for us. In fact, we're looking to increase revenue over the next 30 months by about 3% and upwards of 8% over 5 years.
And what kind of levels are you seeing in terms of total percentage of total billing would be digital? Can you say?
For Corus, it's 3%.
3%?
Yeah, 3 to 5, depending on the market.
Same thing.
What about you?
We're about 12.
So what are you doing differently?
Well, we've been at it a long time, and again, like I said, we've been streaming for 18 years, and interestingly enough, the one area we're guaranteed never to make money is streaming, just about, but we use it as a marketing tool. But we've done an awful lot with video. We've done an awful lot with various forms of interactivity. One of our video things at Hot 97 led to a TV show with VH1, which is kind of fun. So we've really got a remarkable team that's sort of been on the frontiers of this.
Okay. So what has changed in your business in the last 12 to 18 months that you never anticipated that you think is a major change for the industry? Anything come to mind?
And again, I sound like I am truly the one-trick pony, but I think I said that at the NAB convention last month, probably the most gratifying week I've had in 20 years in this business, because there's a realization that we have a way forward, that we can capitalize on a terrestrial signal and fix this business. And that's come before people even understand that we can, as we get these chips turned on, that we have a whole new ecosystem of digital advertising that we can now do interactively with our customers. And we're just beta testing that now. That's really a few years away. But even before that, people realize that if we can turn on 300 million cell phones, you change listening, you change interaction with our audience. So it's been gratifying. Somebody said it was an overnight sensation, and I said, yeah, after 6 years. Yeah. But seeing that come, and now having a unified industry saying, here's where we're going, is very gratifying.
And do you have any evidence yet that consumers are using it?
We have a lot of evidence. The take rates, Sprint says the take rate is the best take rate of any entertainment application they have. We know that on the Google Play Store, it's over 4 out of 5 stars. Tremendous receptivity. We know the research we've done indicates consumers love it. So yeah, we know. Our problem, Eric, is we're only rolling out one phone at a time. It's not like an app that you roll out to 300 million phones all at once. This we have to do one at a time, and we also deliberately rolled it out in the last 4, 5, 6 months without any fanfare, because we wanted to do research and we wanted to find out what word of mouth was. And so we'll start the big you'll see big campaigns now. But the key was, let's find out if there are any bugs in the system and let's work them out before we launch it more globally.
Okay.
I was just going to add something, sort of thinking about 18 months, and although I think it's a longer timeline than 18, with the demise of yellow pages and directory advertising and the rise of search engine optimization at the retail level, I think that for our industry, there's all kinds of money leaking out from the bottom retail portion of our business that we don't even see because there are no reports that provide it. And I'd say that we suspect that it's been going on for a long time, and that it's quite a bit larger than maybe the declines we've seen in radio spend and in conventional television.
Yeah, just to your original point of the last 12 to 18 months, I think some of the themes are pretty similar. To me, it's the next 12 to 18 months where the consumption of audio and video is going to be dramatically different in your car, in your house, on various devices. So I think we're at the tipping point now.
And I think maybe if I could 3 things, unless I can only think of 2. One is that the sales timelines have changed even more dramatically than they have in the past.
How so?
Well, they're very short. I mean, nobody lays in a buy normally nobody lays in a buy now for 26 weeks or 13 weeks even these days. It's Friday, and can you get me on the air Monday? And those tend to be shorter and shorter and shorter. And luckily for us in the radio business, one of our unique selling propositions is the fact that we can turn things around pretty quickly. So I think we need to embrace that as opposed to thinking that it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. It's one of the advantages for us. Secondly, and still on the sales front, is that with everything that's hitting us from all around, the fact that our salespeople can sell cross-platform. We have something called One Call at Rogers, and the fact that when a salesperson goes out, they have a lot more in their toolkit than they used to have. It was just radio before. It's digital now, it's TV, it's various things that we can sell to them, so that's helpful. And I think the third thing is that maybe because of the competitive environment, not just in radio, but all around us, and because I think this is unique to us and will be one of our selling points for the future with the competition, is the further investment that we're certainly making in talent development. I mean, the talent are going to be the differentiator for us, certainly with the competition that we're getting. And so in the last maybe 18 months for us, we've just taken a real step forward in investing in talent.
That's something we're not hearing. The opposite would be true, would you say, in the United States with most companies? Nobody's developing talent, and instead we're narrowing and going to syndicated talent. We'll pick a Ryan Seacrest and put him on 200 radio stations. Jeff?
Well, I think there's a big rift. I think you've got a couple companies that are doing that, and I think, rightly or wrongly, and they may be right, but they're playing the commoditization game. They're saying this is an industry that's flat to down, and we're going to squeeze costs, and we're going to basically program day parts across the country. But there are a lot of other people, I think, who've said, wait a minute, localism is our key, and we're going to continue to nurture talent and continue to build these local brands. So there's a big rift. I'd say most people aren't doing what a couple of the largest companies are doing. And by the way, who knows who's right?
Right. Well, that's the big argument, is that I was talking with the CEO of one of those companies who said our internal evidence is that we can take a person who's been on the air, a heritage air personality who's been on the air for 25 years, replace him for a fraction of the cost with a syndicated personality and not see any drop in numbers. Now, I don't know if that's true in LA, or have you seen that?
Well, I'm not sure which of those companies you're talking about, but
one of them has a C in it.
Well, they both have a C in it, so I won't say. I just know that every time either one of those companies do that, we like competing with them more and more every day. Let me just say that.
Right. We're very committed to talent. It's obviously the differentiator in most of our markets, and you know, as Paul said, it's key to developing that relationship with the audience. So talent commitment, both from the sales end of it, from account executives to sales management to programming to on-air people.
So there's the argument, though, that a talent, let's say, in television, it's been going on for decades. So you put a David Letterman on nationally because he's going to be a lot better than anybody could possibly do on a local television station. So that's their argument. Are any of you doing any syndicated talent to some of your other properties, or are you doing mostly local?
In our case, we're doing the odd bit of syndication, but again, we're very committed to being live and local. We heard about that this morning. And I think, just to get back to your question, what's changed in the last 18 months? I don't know if this is necessarily a change, but I think we've had a total reaffirmation in the last 18 months about how great Canadian radio is, and I would say the same thing for US radio as well. But the CAB commissioned a study, I think as most people in this room know, about 24 months ago. Jeff Fiddler did the research that clearly showed how great the listening audience believes and thinks about Canadian radio, because we are doing great radio, without a doubt. I hope everybody in this room would agree with that. As long as we're live and local and we're being very creative and we're dedicated to the communities that we're licensed to serve, all this, the digital strategy and all that, we have to know and be part of that, and it has to be an additive to what we're doing. But Canadian consumers, the Canadian listeners, love Canadian radio. The average hours tuned, TSL steady. It hasn't really dropped an awful lot. And believe it or not, the average listener loves the on-air radio personalities. And I hope everybody in this room will continue to make great radio, because I think we have a very, very bright future.
Yeah. Paul.
Yeah, just one thing. I think there is we're certainly mostly live and local, but I think there are some opportunities to do some things, certainly from a multi-platform standpoint. We do it now with, we have a Chatelaine radio show, which is one of our magazines here that's part of Rogers Publishing, and it's a show that we put on the air, an hour or 2 hour long show, which we syndicate across the country. It takes one of our key brands, uses some of the resources we have in that brand to put on a particular program or a particular show. But that's really not so much not to just syndicate a show, but to take a brand that we have and make it cross-platform.
So I don't understand your world very much, and I apologize for not understanding it, but you can't just change a format. If you see a trend, you can't suddenly just move towards that trend. You have to get that approved. Is that right?
No.
No.
That's not correct. Certainly if you're in a particular type of format, like a specialty format on AM, that you have to do that, right. Or some other type of license. But basically if, for instance, if Rick wants to change his Calgary station to a modern rock station, even if it's the wrong decision in Calgary, then he can do that.
I understand.
Make the wrong decision, right?
I understand polka is really getting hot again.
Lappy and slap dance music, there you go.
So to that point, are we seeing any trends in our companies, any changes in programming taste, any movement in a particular direction of a hot format?
I think what you're seeing is broadcasters acting more aggressively to format changes than ever before, to the point that Paul pointed out, without having to go through the application process. Certainly in the music genre, that you're seeing companies launch stations, relaunch stations, and rebrand them much more aggressively than ever in the past. And that really speaks to the competition in our industry and the fact that, you know, if you look at a market, you say, well, I think that there's a lot of competition in a particular area, but we think we can execute and take off a smaller piece of that and put together a profitable business, then you're seeing that kind of initiative virtually from all the companies represented here today.
And it's really geared to a lot of new music and new breaking and emerging artists where Canadians are really, you know, gravitating towards. So, you know, you see a lot of formats that are very current based, very new music oriented, very, as Rick said, youth oriented as well, whether that's in New Country or CHR or Hot AC. We gravitate towards those definite formats for sure.
Yeah, and I think we look at it two different ways. One is, and we do a fair amount of research to make sure that the formats that we're in are the formats we should be in to begin with, and secondly, that they do or don't need tweaking. So it's a matter of either reigniting, in some cases, some formats that maybe have fallen for whatever reason, or reinventing them if we have to. It's a combination, maybe those two things. I don't think there have been a lot of changes, other than, as we've talked about, is more of a CHR movement over the last few years. But I think a number of other formats, AC isn't what it used to be. I mean, the AC format today is closer to CHR or Hot AC than it's ever been. So, and I think country changes depending on what kind of music is available at the time, whether it's newer music, or if it's not newer music that's good, then people rely on older music. So I think we haven't seen so many new formats per se, but we've seen, as I say, a reigniting or a reinventing of some of the current ones.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of regulation, you're not regulated by anything that you do online. You don't have to play a third of Canadian music online, et cetera. Have any of you created any specialty formats utilizing your brands?
We tried for a while in the early days of streaming on the Edge here in Toronto, 102.1, thinking that a separate B stream, not necessarily without CanCon, but more newer music, would work. We also experimented with the morning show, doing a kind of a live segment, and there just weren't enough listeners in any one of those either streams or in that 1 hour show to monetize it. And so we said, okay, probably best to continue to invest in the main signal going through and creating a whole digital strategy around that. You know, I think it's something that'll come, but that was, you know, when we tried that was long before services like RDO and Songza were even available. And, you know, that's gone now. Google's now in the business, and so I think streaming B streams is probably a thing of the past.
And are you all listed on some of the aggregator services, like TuneIn?
Yeah, I think TuneIn, they refer to it as a friendly enemy because we're not sure how to respond to them. If you go on there and you search any one of the talent of any of the broadcasters here, there's a whole repertoire of on-demand material that I'm pretty sure they didn't pay performing rights to get, but that they're using. And I don't really know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's certainly out there.
Well, what do you think? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing or bad thing?
Nobody wants to commit?
It's obviously a bit of both, you know. I mean, we create this content and we want to be monetized for it the same way that a music creator wants to be monetized for the music that they create. At the same time, we also want to be on the platforms that people are going to and be available and be front and center in a time of, you know, some pretty significant change.
And let's face it, the consumer out there doesn't really want to pay for that. It'd be nice to get a royalty fee from TuneIn, without a doubt, no doubt about it, but also I think it's important for us to be on those types of platforms, and the CRTC in Canada, as we know, has tried to, many years ago, take regulatory control over the web, but found out that they couldn't control it like they can with radio and television, which I agree with, and I think the consumers want to be able to have choice, and certainly by companies being able to provide a digital strategy that we're part of, certainly allows the consumer to get what they want. I
think they're just a directory, and they're actually playing your stream, so I don't think they're stealing anything. Right. Jeff, did you have something about that?
I think, you know, it's interesting because you see, it's a perfect example where you see the dichotomy between sort of what's happening in the real world and Wall Street. Wall Street has thrown literally hundreds of millions of dollars at all these efforts, and yet none of them have made any money. And it's very tempting. We all say we got to be everywhere. So we do it, and most of my brethren look at it and say, look, it's a marketing cost, we got to be there. I'm on TuneIn, we're actually, you know, we love those people. But the reality is, every time we get away from the only place where we make a profit, you know, it's going to challenge our futures. And our whole point is, look, if we can find a way to maximize what we do, where there is no one in between us and our listeners, that's our future. And our whole point has been, let's get back to making that relationship as interactive as it was 30 or 40 years ago, where people counted on the radio station for contests, community stuff, information, promotions, and we can do all that now and take advantage of the digital world to do that, but not do it through a gatekeeper. Every time you go through a gatekeeper, you are going to finish in second or third or fourth place.
But aren't you becoming a gatekeeper with Next Radio?
No, we don't own Next Radio. Next Radio, when we say Next Radio there's no fees. It is open to every single broadcaster. The only thing we do is the NAB, and we built the platform, and it costs quite a bit of money. When we get interactive advertising, we'll get a small sales commission, about half of what, you know, but that's it. But the whole point of Next Radio is it's for the industry.
Right.
Nobody, in other words, if you're on iHeart or you know, radio or whatever, they collect a fee. This is no fee collected. Every dime that's collected goes to broadcasters. Every dime. And we haven't gotten to collecting fees yet because we haven't done the interactive advertising. But the whole other point is that whether a broadcaster funds Next Radio, and most of them have, or says drop dead, they're still listed the same way. Think of it as the standard tuner in the car, but made interactive. And that's a really critical point, Eric. This is not an Emmis venture. We built the damn thing because there was nobody else to build it. And like an idiot, I accepted the idea of lobbying to get the FM chip activated. Those are two separate things. I just happen to think the more I get into it, the more absolute certain I am this is the key to our future.
Terrific. So what's happening in revenue in your businesses? Are you seeing any changes in the way you develop revenue or have to go about things? How's your business? I heard somebody earlier say that things are flat. Tell us how your business is overall and what possibly you're doing in new ways to develop revenue. Anybody?
I mean, there's obviously, you know, multiple answers to that question. I think, you know, adding more content is a way of driving revenue on various platforms. So we're looking at expanding programming, expanding unduplicatable content in sports and news and talk. You know, we're also looking at expanding our relationships, you know, on the agency side through the digital focus. And on the local focus as well. I mean, as you said earlier, there's local clients that are participating a lot more in Facebook and Google and targeted and geo-targeted advertising. And so we're experimenting a little bit with some of those companies as well in specific markets.
Do you have a digital initiative or a digital department that focuses exclusively on advertisers nationally?
Yeah, correct.
And do you have local digital departments as well?
Correct.
Okay.
I would add to that I think it's incumbent on us to recognize in the segments of our business, there's the transactional, which is the sort of the national and large retailer handled by ad agencies, but then there's the opportunity in markets of any size to develop direct local retail. You know, and that is only really limited to the effort and creativity put into developing that kind of business. You know, one of the good things about our business is that it is a local business, and that when you put an advertiser on the air with good creative and a good level of frequency, they get results, and therefore they renew. You get away from the whole concept of numbers, and it's about the idea more so than the size of the station. And I think you're seeing a lot of the large companies investing significantly in developing their local business, because you know how many businesses are on radio in Toronto today versus the number that are actually registered business. It's a very, very small fraction, which means there's a whole bunch of people out there who have yet to experience the benefit of being advertising on radio.
Lots of opportunity.
And just to tag on to what Chris said in Vancouver, that's exactly what we did. And we decided to go for a real local focus on advertising in Vancouver, even though we were doing well with our country station, JRFM, on a national regional basis. But we found just that there was advertisers out there, businesses that wanted to advertise. People weren't knocking on their door. And I think we as an industry have to do a better job of that, without a doubt, because the consumers today, in my opinion, are still keeping their dollars in their pockets. They're not spending. They're still scared out there. I mean, all governments, US, Canada, have said, pay down your personal debt. And I think people have taken that to heart. They've done that, but they're not spending money as they once did 4 or 5 years ago. And that's why you've seen in Canada in particular, radios being flattered down. I noticed in the US in the first quarter, I believe the advertising revenues are up 3.4% or something to that effect. Hopefully that will shift and come into Canada.
What are they, Jeff?
I think they're probably flat. I think some people have reported up, one down. One thing I wanted to add, and this is sort of a pitch, we've done HD radio in the United States, and I know Bob Struvel's in the crowd, and one thing that we've created, and this is a brand new business venture, was taking a small part of our HD spectrum and creating what we call Broadcasters Traffic Consortium, and that's just found money for the industry, because you take a small part of your digital, of your HD spectrum, and you transmit through automakers real-time traffic data. I hope you guys do it here. I know the automakers are pushing it. Obviously, Bob's pushing it, but we found that it's just a found part of revenue. It's starting to grow into a pretty nice business.
Final thoughts. We're going to wrap up here. Does anybody have anything they want to share as a final thought?
Well, you know, I'll certainly share. One of the questions I know I get asked a lot when our company takes investors and brings them in for discussions, always the question is, you know, what's the future of radio, and is it still a good business? And I think that everybody here would agree that it's a business we have some measure of control, both from the standpoint of our listeners as well as our revenue stream, and it has terrific margins. And I think that in that context, you know, we've got a really, really good business here. Is it a legacy business? Does it require some initiative to be brought to it and some technological help? Yes, but I think all in all, it's a pretty good business, certainly from my perspective.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're very bullish on the radio business, obviously. It's a key part of our overall focus. You know, the thing with radio is it works. You know, when you do a great radio campaign for a client and people walk through that client's door and ring the cash register, it still works. It still works every single day. And I think that that's one of the things that we kind of forget when you talk about all the other noise that's in the marketplace. And we have a lot of great people and a lot of really talented people that ensure that happens on a regular basis. And we're very grateful for that. But it works at the end of the day, and it still works and will continue to work.
And just to add to that, I think we, as part of the CAB last year, we commissioned a research project called Radio Ahead, or Radio Engagement, which was something that we took out to the advertising community, to the CRTC, et cetera, and we're looking at maybe expanding that a little bit this year. And it's something I touched on earlier, which relates to just making sure that the regulator, our clients, are educated on the business, because sometimes we do get cast aside a little bit because that's that shiny new car that comes along. But if somebody invented something that was 24/7, that offered all the choices that radio offers today, that was free and ubiquitous, then the world would beat a path to its door. And that's what radio is today.
Music sites, digital music sites can't tell the mom how to dress her kids in the morning. Can't tell you that it's time to flee your home because there's a forest fire coming down through your backyard, and there's a big flood alert in your marketplace. And local radio, doesn't matter where it is, can do that. And again, I mentioned it earlier, radio's got a bright future. Our group is very committed to growth in the radio industry in Canada.
Great.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's research that Nielsen just came out with Clear Channel a few weeks ago that really talks about the return on investment for advertisers. It was just spectacular. You know, I get depressed when I think of the perception that we have, and yet when you realize that for almost 100 years now, we have been a companion to people in every market we serve, and we can never lose sight of that because we touch people's lives every day. We do ring the cash register, and we make a difference. And when we believe in ourselves, then all of a sudden that message can translate everywhere.
Great. Thank you.